In 1992, writer-director Wayne Kramer released his first film, Blazeland. He followed that up several years later with the short concept film Crossing Over in 1996. Both movies flew under the radar, and it wasn't until 2003 when he would direct again with the film The Cooler. Because of the explicit nature of the film, the studio didn't have much faith in it and released it in 11 theaters. While the movie went unnoticed by the general public, it was a hit with critics. The movie was also a winner of many industry awards and had an Oscar nomination for Alec Baldwin in a Best Supporting Actor role. With the attention gained over this, Kramer had a little more leeway over choosing his next production. He grew up with gritty crime movies like Straw Dogs and Carlito's Way and wanted to make something like that. He was frustrated with the new wave of PG-13 movies that was watering down content that used to be aimed at an adult audience. He wanted to create a throwback to the older crime films to bring back the grit that was missing. He began writing his version of a ruthless, mean-spirited tale of crime and corruption in New Jersey. He consulted with producer Michael Pierce, who produced The Cooler. Pierce said out of every script he's ever seen from Kramer, this was the movie that he wanted to make the most. They went looking for producers and were picked up by Media 8 Entertainment, a relatively new company at the time. They were interested in unusual films that went against the norm, like Monster, Havoc, and Santa's Sleigh. They gave him full creative control to make the film he wanted to make. With the budget in place, Kramer storyboarded the entire film, so each shot would be how he envisioned it. The script was a gritty action crime drama about an undercover cop that has to recover a stolen gun. As the script took shape, Kramer realized something. It felt like something out of Grimm's fairy tales. With this in mind, he tweaked things accordingly. Next, they started casting. Paul Walker was hired to play the cop, Joey Gazelle. They originally wanted Thomas Jane, but he declined because of a scheduling conflict. Walker happily took the role because it gave him the opportunity to play a character that skirted the line of good and bad. Even though he played an undercover cop in The Fast and the Furious, Joey Gazelle was a completely different character. Vera Farmiga plays Joey Gazelle's wife, Teresa. She was still up and coming when filming began, but thanks to the Conjuring series and Bates Motel, she's become a very sought-after actress. Cameron Bright plays the young abused neighbor, Oleg. They loved how serious he was for such a young actor. With a roughly $17 million budget, they started filming. The movie was set to take place in New Jersey, but it was too expensive to film there, so they moved everything to Prague. For the scenes in the suburbs, they had to ship over American appliances and furniture. About 95% of the movie was filmed in Prague and 5% in New Jersey. The exterior of the diner was the Arlington Diner in Jersey. The interior was a set in Prague. Outdoors at the Gazelle House was filmed in Newark, New Jersey. This scene was a set that they hired graffiti artists to paint to make it look more authentic. The hospital set was redressed and used as the police station. For the driving scenes, they tried to do as many close-ups on the cars as possible so you wouldn't be able to see the Prague architecture. The strip club was a regular club in the Czech Republic they turned into a strip club. To continue to push the movie into the grid of the 70s, they had full frontal nudity, something not as common in the 2000s. The ice skating rink was actually 2 rinks in the Czech Republic. Kramer had a vision of a shootout in an ice rink, lit by blacklight. He had to beg the studio to let him do this because even though they gave him freedom over the film, it would cost $100,000 just to light the rink. The studio agreed, and to help them make the scene even more stylistic, they used fluorescent paint on the ice and added colors bouncing off the ice chips when they were hit by bullets. Even with spikes on their shoes, some of the actors slipped and fell. In the beginning of the film, they wanted to use Born to Run from Bruce Springsteen, not only because it fit the scene, but because Springsteen was from Jersey. They tried to contact him, but his handlers never returned their calls. The structure of the film revolved around something pivotal early on. Oleg's father Anzor is watching the John Wayne movie, The Cowboys. In the beginning, Anzor is obsessing over the movie and how disgusted he was with the American version of the film because John Wayne dies. Oleg, on the other hand, is disgusted with his father for beating him and his mother, so he says,
John Wayne was a faggot.
And shoots him with the gun he stole from Joey. Near the end of the film, Anzor realizes he's the bad guy, which shocks him back into the real world, which is why the film melts. He refuses to shoot Oleg, and the mob guys kill him, like how Wayne was killed in The Cowboys. Their first hurdle was getting Warner Brothers, who owned the rights, to allow them to use the footage in the movie. The lawyers refused because the scene where the Cowboys was playing was too violent. They made the concession that the scene would have no offensive language, violence, or child abuse. Next, they had to get the approval to use John Wayne's likeness from Ethan Wayne, his son and manager of John Wayne Enterprises. Kramer was afraid that if he sent him the script, he'd shoot it down because he wasn't seeing it in context. They took a chance and filmed the scenes without permission. They then showed them to Ethan, who liked what he saw and gave his approval. It helped that he was already a fan of The Cooler. Chaz Palminteri's character, Detective Rydell, was an homage to director Mark Rydell, the director of The Cowboys. Since the movie took place in the underworld, much of the film was color corrected to be, as Kramer called it, cockroach-colored lighting. For parts with the main characters who still had potential for redemption, they used lots of cyan and amber to give the film a bruised look to match the broken characters. The child molester scene threw a lot of people off. Kramer wanted it in the film as an homage to Night of the Hunter, a movie where kids were in danger, which seems to be taboo in films today. He wanted the movie to have an impact similar to the Gimp scene in Pulp Fiction. They tried to cast numerous actors and actresses who all turned the roles down because they didn't want to play pedophiles. They finally were able to get Bruce Altman to play Dez and Elizabeth Mitchell to play Adele. The design of Dez and Adele's apartment was made to look like a maze. There were no sharp corners and the whole location had a very confusing layout. The scenes were even more unusual because the movie switched to Teresa for a chunk of the film. They worked with police who handled child abduction cases and tried to make the scenes as close as possible to disgusting reality. Farmiga loved the script, but the part that sold her on the movie was this segment because it was so emotional and it allowed her to be the hero. Altman had been acting since the 80s, but was worried over one aspect of the film. In all his years of TV and movie work, he'd never been equipped with a blood squib. While the movie had some CG, they tried to do what they could practically. A big scene was when the bullet flies through the window into the Gazelle house. This was mostly done in camera. The guy sitting in the Gazelle house was Paul Walker's brother, and when the camera pans back across the way, it's Paul. The only things they added in the scene were elements like the glass. As I said earlier, the movie was intentionally constructed to be like a Grimm's fairy tale. The movie takes place in the fictional town of Grimley. The pimp was the Mad Hatter. He's not wearing a hat, but he has a crown necklace. The hooker was the Blue Fairy, who helped Oleg. The Raggedy Man was the Boogeyman. Detective Rydell was the evil giant. Teresa was Mother Earth. The child molesters were a combination of wolves in sheep's clothing and a reverse Hansel and Gretel. Instead of the witch abducting Hansel and Gretel, they were the witches abducting Oleg. On Adele's medicine bottle, it says Adele Hansel, and it's a prescription for Zovirax, which is a medicine for herpes. The security code is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. They also wanted to show how evil they were by having their shadows twist and distort. Joey was the big bad wolf. Oleg was Pinocchio. He was trapped in his house and wanted to be a real boy and live with the Gazelle family. Oleg was already in the fairy tale, and he opens the rabbit hole by shooting his father. Joey goes down the rabbit hole to rescue Oleg, and after defeating the giant, he comes out of the rabbit hole and back to reality. In the ice cream shop, there's fairy tale characters as paintings on the walls. After filming and editing, they submitted the movie to the MPAA for a rating. Kramer was fully expecting it to come back with an NC-17, but much to his surprise, they gave it an R. The most gruesome part of the film took place in the ice rink, and he thought that was what was going to get him an NC-17. However, because he decided to use the blacklight, that worked in his favor. Under the blacklight, the blood looked black, and they said because the blood wasn't red, it was okay. The movie was released on February 24th, 2006, and opened in 9th place. It only pulled in a little over $9 million in its theatrical run. It gained more attention on home video when various critics and reviewers labeled it one of the best, most overlooked films of the year. After Running Scared, Kramer took his short film, Crossing Over, and expanded it into a full-length feature. Running Scared is a terrific movie. It brings back the raw nature of films from the 70s with some modern touches. It showcased Paul Walker's acting skills as more than just good-looking guy. With the intensity of the film, he had to play his character on edge the entire time. Vera Farmiga shined in her small but pivotal role, and her scenes with the child molesters is one of the film's biggest standouts. The spin of a dark fairy tale being told within a crime action drama was incredibly unique. It's a shame the movie did so poorly. Here was an example of a studio letting a director make his vision unhampered, and for whatever reason the film still flopped. Kramer felt some of the criticism laid on the film was unwarranted. Some people were taking the film too seriously, looking for things to nitpick, instead of just going along for the ride. The film was not meant to be taken 100% seriously. It was a dark fairy tale, an intentionally controversial film that went places many others were afraid to go. It was a film that was made for a demographic that seems to have been forgotten, the adult demographic.
No, Nikki's busy. Come on, I'll be quick and real quiet. Come on.
Quiet, I don't think so. Quick, I can believe.